bar here. Or there we go. That's better. Okay. I'm unmuted. Sorry for that delay. Here are some great words for you. These are from the Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook. And he said, "The pure righteous do not complain of the dark, but increase the light. They do not complain of evil, but increase justice. They do not complain of heresy, but increase faith. They do not complain of ignorance, but increase wisdom." So in honor of Passover, wise words from the Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook. All right, go to the next slide. Okay, well, what we have here is a powerful image. It's been associated with manifest destiny, main topic for this module. And the name of this painting, which was done in the 1800s, is "Westward, the Course of Empire Takes Its Way." It was created by a German-born artist, but it became one of the go-to images for westward expansion, westward conquest. And as far as I can see, there are no indigenous people depicted here. What you have here are the settlers going about their colonization, and it has a very mythic, also religious quality to it in many ways. It's kind of hard to see, but toward the background there, you can just barely make out a cross. Okay, so Christianity is represented, but quite an heroic image here. All right, go to the next slide. Okay, so this is our second lecture virtually for Module 4, Native Peoples, Mexico, and Manifest Destiny. And next. Okay, so a quick review of Module 4 topics. This slide looks a little off, but it's not. Sorry about that, but Manifest Destiny. So we're defining a set of ideas with cultural, political, economic, racial, and religious implications and consequences. And we need to be conscientious about the impact of words and language. This period has been referred to as westward expansion, also referred to as empire and conquest. We'll also be looking at Native views on land theft and white settlement, and the statements of Black Hawk, the Cherokee Nation, and Tecumseh, primary sources. So those are assigned for the reading as well. Okay, go to the next slide. Right, here's another very influential image associated with Manifest Destiny. Frances Palmer created this one, an artist born in England. And she generally went by the name of Fanny Palmer. This is from 1866. So the Civil War was in progress at that point. And it's called The Rocky Mountains, Emigrants Crossing the Plain. Now, unlike the previous image, this one's in black and white, okay? And it's a little less boisterous, or a lot less boisterous than the previous one. That one had a lot of activity in it. But you do see the wagon train on its way west, crossing the plains, and you do see kind of in the center there, just to the right of center a little bit, you do see some indigenous people depicted, okay? But they are not the main source of the action here, okay? Go to the next slide. Okay, so in this module, one of the main goals that you should have is to know manifest destiny as well as possible. So with this article by Amy Greenberg that I'll be talking about today, there's also an earlier article on manifest destiny and what your discussion teachers provide for you, that it should be, that you should have a lot of resources for this module to know manifest destiny well. We hope that you will achieve that. So part of that is to look at the ideological origins of manifest destiny. Remember, a while ago in this class, I gave you a definition of ideology. So it remains important, ideology. And also connections among whiteness, civilization, and land ownership related to manifest destiny. So that's part of the reading for today, and I'll reinforce that in the lecture. We'll go to the next slide now. Yet another image. I believe this one is also by Frances Palmer, or Fanny Palmer. It's in color this time. It's called Across the Continent. All right. And it's subtitled with the same title as the very first image that I showed you. So, yeah, the idea of westward, the course of empire takes its way, an irresistible momentum at this point. Okay. So mid-1800s, one thing you get coming from the lower right-hand corner and going up into the center of the image, there's the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, all right? And depending on your screen size there, the smoke pouring out of the engine there, it's really starting to create a cloud on the ground around the indigenous people there on their horses toward the right-hand side of the screen. Now on the left-hand side of the screen, that's where the main action is. And you're getting a lot of human development here, a lot of things being built. The very first building there in the foreground, that's a public school, okay? So the institutions of civilization are doing their thing. And the wilderness, as they call it, is still very beautiful, but it's starting to take a back seat to civilization. We'll go to the next slide. So some more key points, concepts, and questions to consider for this module. And these are things that you may have opportunities to work with in your discussion sections. So this fact, in the early decades, America, the idea of America being an empire, expanding all the way across much of North America and later the world, This was not part of the plan of the founders. Empires were seen as something that America wanted nothing to do with, that empires, this was something that Europeans did when they went to Africa, when they went to Asia, to South America and North America. But we were going to break away from that and not be about that kind of domination and exploitation. It did, of course, turn out much differently. And Amy Greenberg's chapter, which was assigned for today, the first half of it, that is, gives you a terrific take on this. Also, but by the end of the 1800s, by the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, America had certainly become an empire. So, how and why? How and why did this happen? And so you get the title of this chapter. It says, Introduction, the quote unquote free development of a North American empire. Greenberg is asking us to question the idea that this was a free, natural, sort of organic development. No, not at all. It was political, it was cultural, it was ideological. All right, next slide. So let's learn a little bit about our distinguished author here, Amy Greenberg. You see her on the left-hand side. Great education. She earned her BA from University of California, 1989, went on to earn her MA and her PhD, all of these in history. Graduated from Harvard, 1995. So primarily, she's been an historian of antebellum America. So that means that's a Latin word for prior to the war. So prior to the Civil War, antebellum America, 1800 to 1860. She has a big interest in relationship between the US and the rest of the world in the decades before that war. Her books, there are many of them. She did a biography of a politically powerful First Lady. She did a narrative history of the US-Mexican War. She investigated the role of ideology in manifest destiny, and this is throughout the rest of the world and here in America at home, and looked at relationships among gender, culture, and urbanization. So the movement from the United States being a primarily agricultural nation to a much more urban, industrialized nation. Okay, next. Couple of books here by Amy Greenberg. The one on the left-hand side, A Wicked War, Polk, Clay, Lincoln, and the 1846 U.S. invasion of Mexico. So in this chapter, you'll read the second half for next week. Amy Greenberg looks at the U.S. war with Mexico. So this book, A Wicked War, gives a full-scale coverage of that, okay? And so, yeah, many people in America did see it as a wicked war. It had its support as well, but there was plenty of opposition to the U.S. war with Mexico as well. And her book on First Lady Sarah Polk, the spouse of James Knox Polk, the U.S. president during the war with Mexico. Okay? All right. Next slide. Okay, helping you navigate through this part of the reading. Here's some various topics, subheadings in the chapter. So, yeah, as a recap, ideological origins of manifest destiny. Greenberg discusses those along with territorial expansion in the early republic, factors driving early expansionism, and expansionism and Indian people. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so this is another image. This time, Native peoples are front and center here. And they're playing a game with a ball here and sticks. Okay. This may have been a forerunner of lacrosse or some other types of games, but it was done by a Euro-American artist. I'll get you the title for it. But this is one of the, I think what's intended here is a more positive view of indigenous life and possibly a romanticized vision of that life, and a very, again, slightly religious undertones here with the, the clouds and the, you get a real sense of something special going on here out there in the beautiful wilderness. So there was, some artists were quite concerned about the indigenous way of life being destroyed, and some did try to capture that. And that may be what's going on here. Okay. All right. So let's go a little deeper with the ideological origins of manifest destiny. And just to help you navigate the article, this is on pages 4 and 5 of the reading, okay? So one thing we really need to look at is something we've already learned a little bit about in this class, or a lot about, the roots of American exceptionalism in the New England colonies. So again, going back to John Winthrop, talked about him again yesterday, and Ronald Takaki saw the influence of Winthrop's ideas on people like Andrew Jackson. So yeah, no doubt, before there was even a United States, when it was a collection of colonies, when Winthrop, before he even got to the United States, he may not have realized it, but he was putting down some of the founding stones for for manifest destiny, when he spoke about the shining city on a hill. All right, so the major population growth also had some impact on these ideological origins. The fact that, the colonists were not only surviving and starting to thrive here, but their numbers were growing. They were doing well. They were populating what they thought of as the wilderness. So this was interpreted as a sign that they were doing something right. And it tied into religion, which of course religion tries to present itself as non-ideological, but not that simple. And another big factor in the development of this ideology, manifest destiny, when the American rebels beat Britain and drove the British out of North America, this part of North America, this had a huge impact, like fuel injection on a Corvette's engine, right? this is how powerful it was for ideology of manifest destiny over time. Yeah, defeating Britain gave Americans a big ideological boost. And there was a burgeoning belief in racial superiority. We've already looked at some of this in Module 2, right? And religious superiority. So the more powerful United States got, the more they look to, the more many Americans look to the white race and Christianity, particularly Protestant Christianity, as the way for people to be. So all of these had big impact on those ideological origins. Please go deeper with that on Greenberg's explanations, pages 4 and 5. All right, next slide. Oh, sorry, almost forgot this point. The innovative form of government in the new country, United States. All right, so an experiment in democracy, so many aspects of it that were new to the world. So yeah, the power and energy of newness, of innovation, tied into the mission of Manifest Destiny. And now I will actually go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, another Manifest Destiny image. This one much more lonely than some of the others, a little quieter, more peaceful. But this depicts a settler with his dog, a male settler, appears to be, and there's somebody lurking in the background, can't quite make out who that is, but this is a depiction of California, I believe, and this man has obviously staked his claim, found his place in the wilderness, and is on the way there with his cabin, his log cabin built with his very own hands. So, yeah, an image of individual settlement. And next. Okay. Sorry about this. Normally, I like to put up the points one at a time, but we'll have them all on the screen at once this time. All right, so going further into Greenberg's chapter, on pages 5, 6, 7, and into 8 and 9, Greenberg discusses territorial expansion in the early republic. All right, so perhaps the first big or huge factor, part of that expansion came from the very top, from President Jefferson at the beginning, pretty much the beginning of the 19th century. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. All right. So as it says in the article, in the chapter, that Jefferson took a dramatic step toward the empire of liberty that he wrote about, purchased the Trans-Mississippi River region. This was 828,000 square miles, $15 million. All right. So he had some concerns about doing this. He was concerned about the potential threat of French people on the Mississippi River, and there's some other factors in there that he was concerned about. These overshadowed his scruples about the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so Greenberg explains that in this part of the chapter. Also, Andrew Jackson, 15 years later, 1818, and you'll find some material about this on page 8. So this was when Andrew Jackson, future president, establishing himself as a military hero, that he invaded Spanish Florida, and tells a little bit about, his stated reasons for doing so. But the ultimate reason was to get the Spanish out of Florida and North America. There's the Monroe Doctrine, also huge, right? 5 years later. So this was, it said that the United States would not tolerate a weak European power transferring an American colonial holding to a stronger European power. So this, obviously a founding doctrine that established U.S. power in this hemisphere. Also, settlers, speculators, and squatters, the activities of people who did these kind of things to the land. So they're like the settlers, like the image I showed you just before this slide. The speculators, the people who would buy up land at a very low price and sell it later for a very high price. And the squatters, the people who would come into indigenous lands illegally, set up what they wanted to there, stake a claim, doing it illegal. Sometimes the U.S. government asked them to leave, at other times not. So the squatters helped expand the territory illegally. So there was a lot of unethical activity going on with the speculators and illegal activity going on with the squatters. Again, this is covered nicely in Greenberg's chapter. She goes into a lot more detail than I can for this lecture. All right, next slide. Okay, now image from 1881. And so this is, excuse me, very close to the time when Frederick Jackson Turner presented his very influential paper on the development of the frontier and significance of the frontier in American history. I believe this was probably a postcard, and it was put out by the New Home Sewing Machine Company in New York City and in Massachusetts. So what you have here, in contrast to the previous image that I showed you, which had a very solitary settler, by this time, you have the traditional nuclear heteronormative family unit in the far west. And you have the, toward the right there, the male member of the family there, the father, with a child on his shoulder and a child trailing behind him with a farm implement, a dog. All right, so a settlement taking, domestic shape here, and of course his spouse there seated at the sewing machine, waiting for him, waiting for her husband and family to come in from their hard work. Yeah, this would have been an advertisement postcard that reached a lot of households and attracted quite a few people to go to the far west. Go to the next slide. Okay, continuing with factors driving early expansionism. Okay, so as the population grew, concerns about security in the East began to grow. There was more crime, unrest, alcohol became bigger and bigger problems. So the idea of going west as sort of a safety valve for some of the concerns related to overcrowding, this was important. Also, immigration from Europe became more and more prevalent in the early to mid 1800s. So this also led to a greater belief in expansionism and in manifest destiny. The predominance of farming in the country at that point. Okay, so as the land in the East began to be developed, cultivated, taken away from indigenous control, farming, there needed to be, the land began, there was less and less land, right? So this inspired more Western movement to find unoccupied land for farming, and eventually laws such as the Homestead Act, with plentiful land available for very, very low prices. Yeah, inexpensive, increasingly plentiful land. This was a huge lure for people who were getting fed up with conditions in the East. They needed more. Okay. May have one more point here or go to the next slide. Again, the speculators and the squatters. Don't want to forget about their activities as individuals. And when you combine all these things, a huge driving force for early expansionism. All right, next slide. So in the previous lecture and in Takaki's chapter, which was assigned this week, talked about the extraordinary significance of the buffalo hunt to the Plains Indians and to the Pawnee. And this image, also done in the late 1800s by a European descended artist, depicts the decline and fall of this way of life and the widespread almost elimination, almost extinction of the buffalo. Okay, so this focuses on the plight of the indigenous people, and again, it may be one of those images that draws on some sorrow for what befell the indigenous populations. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. All right, so things to think about as draw this lecture to a close. Okay, so in thinking about expansionism in Indian people, there should be some really good opportunities for you in discussion section to talk about this, maybe in a big group, maybe in small groups, but hope you can have a great dialogue there. For example, I would suggest that perhaps your discussion teachers would give you an opportunity to work with some of these primary sources. I haven't said much about Black Hawk or Tecumseh, but be good to see what you think about their words and what they had to say about manifest destiny and the loss of their land and way of life. Perhaps your discussion teachers can provide you with some images, as I have in this lecture, some ones that you haven't seen, and some great opportunities to read those as you would any other text and come up with some ideas about what they say about manifest destiny. Don't forget about the Cocky chapter. That is a great place to start with the experiences of indigenous peoples in this period. And also the Greenberg chapter, the first half of that. Those two readings are by far the most important ones in this chapter and can really get you where you need to go with manifest destiny. Okay? All right. So that concludes what I have in this lecture material this time. Okay. And let me ask if you have any questions for me in the time that we have left. You can put those in the chat if you like. Looks like we have 19 folks with us today. That's great. And I hope we have a lot more when I post this to Canvas. Want everybody to see and hear this. Okay. Okay, going once, going twice, 3 times. Doesn't look like any questions this time. Hope that's a good sign. But do reach out to me if you have them and want to ask me through email or through Zoom. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and have a wonderful Thursday. Bye-bye.